2.5 years ago, it seemed like a mission impossible, but we're there. We fixed the fiscal deficit is down to 3%, debt to GDP ratio at 24%. Current account deficit has largely disappeared. We've rebuilt reserves in tune of $120 billion. We have exited contingent liabilities of $140 billion. Growth remain sub-trend. If you look at last 25 years, growth was 5.5%. Now we are down to about 3 to 4%, which is modest, but it's still manageable. And unemployment in single digit. The biggest challenge still is inflation. That's what keeps me awake. It's down to around 31% from from mid 70s. That sounds crazy. But it's destined to single digit. So we've addressed a lot of concerns. The key challenge is structural transformation that will help make all these gains lasting. And the year 2026, President Erdogan has announced, will be the year of structural reforms. And I'm very optimistic. Great to be back in Doha. Industrial policies clearly have made a comeback. And we're not immune to that trend, meaning we've also certainly we have a number of industrial policy initiatives. But the difference between today and the past, in 70s, it was more import substitution. Today, it's really much better designed, targeted, and ultimately because you deploy public resources. So we're not going back to 1970s, let's put it that way. How do we deal with this fragmentation? First of all, much of Turkey's trade with obviously the rest of the world is rule-based. 62% of our exports are destined to countries where we have free trade agreements, because we have free trade agreements with 54 countries and 3 more agreements are pending. So that covers almost 2/3 of our exports. And when we look at the composition of our exports of goods and services, we are the world's top 20 export of services, where tourism, medical tourism, and logistics, transportation are big ticket items. Construction. We're number 4th in the world in terms of as a tourist destination. So we have a very large services surplus, which we would like to sustain by investing in the hyperscaler data centers, becoming the region's hub for exports of digital services. So we still have an upside there. I think in terms of trade of goods, as I said, we're not immune to what's happening, but certainly when we look at FTA countries combined with immediate neighborhoods, which we feel that we are friend and near. So nearshoring, friendshoring, and rule-based trade accounts for roughly about 85% of Turkish exports. So we're not doing anything out of ordinary except focusing on how to boost services trade, because local value add is higher. Industrial policies is a byproduct, not necessarily a response to fragmentation, but more about how to move up the value chain. We've identified 8 areas, 30 products by 2030, and we call it HIT 30, and we're going to support these programs with $30 billion of co-investments or investment incentives. And they include robotics, semiconductors, because, we are a major producer of white goods. Defense industry is really big. So we're trying to invest in supply chains in some of these areas because we know that risk of disruption is out there. So to keep it short, we continue to remain open. We favor rule-based trade. And that's why we are seeking a free trade agreement with GCC countries. So clearly, we're not afraid of liberal, open, rule-based trade. We have benefited from it. But if fragmentation is there, then we're going to focus on regional integration as an antidote to fragmentation. That's why we are trying to persuade our partners in this region to invest in a new development road linking Persian Gulf to Turkey through high-speed railway and motorway, so that we can connect the region to Beijing and London, because we do have the infrastructure. So connectivity, regional integration, industrial policies, as well as services exports. If you include our Syrian refugee brothers and sisters, it's about 90 million people, $1.6 trillion GDP. The indirect impact of this tariff war is probably the most significant risk. The China rerouting or Asia rerouting, and it's happening. And we are very concerned. So when the news flow that the US and China have reached an agreement, we are delighted, because otherwise, countries don't destroy their capacities. They dump. And they do. And we are seeing strong evidence of that. Chinese exports to US are falling sharply, or at least they were. And Chinese exports to us, our third markets, Europe, are rising substantially. We are more worried about not tariffs, but indirect impact of tariffs and also non-tariff barriers. We've been talking to our Chinese counterparts to see how we can balance things out. Their trade surplus vis-a-vis Turkey is like $47 billion. It accounts for more than half of our trade gap. When we talk to them, they say we're not, trying to post a surplus vis-a-vis Turkey. So we say, look, how can we balance things out? For example, let more Chinese to come to Turkey, because we are the fourth largest tourist destination. And before that, they cannot walk to Turkey. They need flights, and we need slots. So things like that. But we're talking, we're constructive. We're trying to see how we can address, how we can rebalance things through services, through investments, through financing. So the answer to your question is that clearly no one is immune. And I think the indirect impact for countries like Turkey is much more pronounced, because we are the world's 14th largest manufacturing base. And in particular, labor-intensive segments, there are big dislocations. And we're trying to see how we can help. And that's why I think investing in logistics, targeted, smart fiscal policy, addressing, some of these dislocations is going to be very important. So getting people politically, socially to agree that we can fix the kind of like the side effects of openness is going to be very critical in rebuilding the trade system globally. Well, 2.5 years